I've been asked the worst question for the past 10 plus years. What is your book about? I've really struggled to answer that question for a really long time because as a writer, I have spent most of my time buried in the details and the little nitty-gritty, elements of the story that I've been writing. And so it was really hard for me to grasp or to explain the major themes or to identify the major themes and even the genre because I was so buried in, okay, well, this is this little intricacy, this little detail, and this is, right? I was so stuck in the details and the nitty-gritty elements of my story. And like I said, I also struggled a lot with identifying what the genre of the book was. And I'll be honest, I think the major reason why I had such a hard time with the genre was because I was somewhat embarrassed about what the genre actually was. I've always been surrounded by people who really enjoyed, dystopians and fantasies and, things that were very adventurous and very just like out of this world, right? Very action-packed. And that wasn't what my story was. It's not what my story is. And so I felt really self-conscious because, everybody around me, is really into things like Hunger Games and, all of the different fantasy and dystopians and apocalypse and, these kinds of books. And here I am writing an emotional romance. I was a little self-conscious of that. Let's just say I don't really fit in with the readers in my immediate family and in my immediate surroundings. But obviously, when you go to publish a book, you have to get very honest with yourself. You have to be very real with yourself. Like, this is what it is, and you have to own it. You have to own it, and you have to name it. You have to give it a title. You have to characterize it and categorize it and tell people what it actually is. And so today, I am going to share with you what Hughes actually is, what genre it is, hallelujah, and what Hughes, is all about. So first off, let's talk about the genre because I feel like that honestly, that gives most people a good picture of any story. So Hughes I consider Hughes to be an emotional romance. But more than that, to go really deep and to be very nitty-gritty, I consider it to be a very moody, a very vibey, emotional romance. There are a lot of romantic themes, and the book really focuses on relationship and sort of that emotional connection, but it's also filled with, sweaters and blankets and coffee and, cozy things, moody things, vibey things. And part of the emotion of the book, part of the feeling of the book is the environment that the characters find themselves in. Well, Hughes takes a very in-depth look at the emotions and the feelings of our main characters, Amory and Alex. It is also really building that connection with the environment that these characters find themselves in. Because I think that really does play a lot into, the feeling of somebody and the emotion of somebody is where they find themselves. And a lot of how Amory, our main character, a lot of how she functions and how she talks and where she finds comfort, it's sort of that difference of, I'm home versus I'm not home. And having those identifiers and really creating that emotional connection with an environment and with a place. And so while there is a lot of stuff going on, with the emotions and in the mind and, all that kind of stuff with the characters, there's also a lot going on with the environment and a connection that's built with the environment. And so I would have to say that this book is it's aesthetic. It's aesthetic for the mind. It's aesthetic for, the vibes and the mood that is in the book. Now, the $1 million question that everybody asks. What have you been writing, right? What is Hughes all about? I like to tell people, a little disclaimer, Hughes does touch on some very sensitive topics and some sort of touchy topics. And so I do recommend that whoever does read Hughes does read it with care, whether it is that you have experienced some of the traumatic things that Hughes describes, or if you haven't read that, if you haven't experienced those things, still read with care. It's very sensitive, it's very touchy, and so it can be sort of bothersome and disturbing to people. And I don't think that it shouldn't be disturbing, but I think that it should be read with an awareness that some disturbing things might happen. So Hughes follows the lives of Amory Hughes and Alex Blake. The story really kicks off when Amory returns returns home after 5 years of captivity and abuse. And Hughes is really focusing on how she recovers from that trauma, how she deals with the consequences of that trauma, and how her trauma has impacted her and Alex's relationship. And that is the biggest theme throughout the book, which is why it is, in fact, considered a romance. The biggest theme is Alex and Amory. Because we're really looking at, okay, how can Amory continue this relationship or carry on with a relationship after her traumatic experience and after being abused? How does Amory heal from that abuse so that way she can continue her relationship? And how can Alex help her? Can Alex help her through the healing process of, healing from that trauma and healing from that abuse? And so this might sound like a super serious story, right? Oh my word, abuse and trauma and blah, right? It might sound super serious, and in some ways it is very serious. But I would like to share a few elements of the story that really make it such an enjoyable story, because while it does touch on very serious topics, what I would have to say is that you are not necessarily completely consumed by that. You are more drawn to the relationship that's being built and the relationship that you're becoming more familiar with between Amory and Alex. I just want to share a few of my favorite elements, or a few elements that really do make the story a fabulous read. Number one, and this guy gets a standing ovation because I love him to pieces, and this is Alex. Just in general, Alex. The only way I know how to describe Alex is that Alex is wonderful. He's wonderful. Alex is incredibly broken. He's somewhat sketchy, somewhat shady, and he's made a lot of mistakes, and he's living with a lot of mistakes, and he's living with the consequences of his mistakes. But at his core, from the beginning, you can tell Alex is just a really great guy. Alex is just a really nice guy. He's a super chill guy. He's a super laid back guy. He's somewhat reserved and somewhat quiet, but overall, he's a great guy, and you can tell from chapter 1, from page 1, that he genuinely cares about Amory, and that he genuinely loves Amory, and he genuinely wants Amory to be okay. That might seem like it's a spoiler. It's not. There are no love triangles. There are no, who's she gonna choose? No, it's obvious who she's going to choose from page 1. And it's obvious who she's going to end up with on page 1. And I wanted it to be this inevitable love because when you know this is the person that this person's going to end up with, you can really get more into the relationship, and you can really start to nurture that relationship and see more familiarity and see more comfort and see more connection in the relationship. So the number one reason why you should 100% absolutely and definitely read Hughes is because of Alex. I love that man. The second reason why Hughes is such an enjoyable read is because of the snappy and familiar conversation. Amory doesn't know a lot of people. She's sort of introverted, she's sort of quiet, she keeps to herself. But with the people that she does know, she has very snappy and very familiar conversation with them. She's very close to them. She's very familiar with them. And so one of the best elements of Hughes, it's the conversation, because they have inside jokes. They have, if you know, you know, and they have humor, and they have, snappy kind of, situations, or, how you just say those sort of one-off things or inside jokes and stuff like that. There's all of that kind of stuff in the conversations, and there's tons of personality. And so what I think the conversation really does for Hughes, and what it does for you as the reader of Hughes, is that it helps you really build that connection with the characters, and it really makes you feel at home with the characters. It doesn't feel like, oh, well, that's a really weird thing to say, or, the awkward bits, it's sort of pointed out, that was super awkward for you to say. It's very real, and I feel like the conversations really allow you to settle in and get a grip for the characters and understand the characters and just feel sort of at peace. It's not like the conversations are forced. It's not like the conversations are fake. They are very real. They are very authentic, and they are very, once again, familiar. Third the vibe, okay? Hughes is first and foremost 100% a vibe. It primarily takes place in a coffee shop, and any good coffee shop has a good vibe. Any good coffee shop has a good, aura, a good feeling, a good, whatever about it. Most of the story takes place in a coffee shop, and it has this very cozy, very moody atmosphere about it, and it largely does have to do with the environment. While we are touching on sensitive topics, and Emery and Alex are sort of these moody, introspective, artistic people, the environment itself really does feed into the vibe of the story. Because it's not like, oh, we're being whisked away to a spectacular, luxurious penthouse apartment and that's what's going to save our lives. No, it's, oh, this is, we have brick walls and things are crumbling and the doors are old and the floors are old and it's cold and so we need right? It's a very real environment and it's a very cozy feeling environment. In that environment, like I said earlier, it allows characters to feel at home because that is really one of the biggest but underlying themes of the story is that idea of coming home, right? Of coming home and the simplicity that home actually is, the simplicity that home actually holds. Because I think that a lot of times we associate, oh, well, if they get whisked away by a billionaire to a beautiful apartment, then they're going to feel at home and they're going to feel comfortable because it's going to be luxurious. And that's not necessarily true. Home is really about, how safe you feel and how comfortable you feel and the people that are there with you and how you are able to sort of nest yourself there and how you're able to heal there. And so that is what this story, that's a major theme that is in the story, is coming home. And the environment itself really does go into feed into that idea and that theme. And the fourth, this is sort of a one-off reason why you should read Hughes. Amory and her sister are Irish. I feel like I'm gonna get the question at some point in time, why are they Irish? I don't know why they're Irish, okay? Why is anybody Irish? I met them that way, I encountered them that way. It was just, you're Irish. And for me, that's an added reason for why I love them. I think that I don't know, Irish culture is just so cool to me, are just wonderful. I find them to be wonderful, and I find sort of the little quirks that they might have, or, just the things that the elements that they bring, and the fact that, oh, well, and you're Irish, I think that it just adds a little level of character to the characters that, I don't know, just makes me love them more. So the moral of the story for Hughes and for this video is that Hughes is a perspective. First and foremost, Hughes is a perspective. And it's oftentimes a very pained perspective, but it's a very humble perspective and a very beautiful perspective. My hope is that whoever does read Hughes would somehow feel seen by Hughes. The story really touches on very real people dealing with very real issues and very real pain and very real hardships, and nobody is saving anyone from anything. It's all about sort of, okay, well, this is your problem, so what are you going to do about it? And how are you going to move forward from that? And how are you going to, rise up from that? How do you heal? How do you grieve? How do you accept? How do you move forward when some of the most traumatic things have happened to you? And so I think that a lot of people can relate to this story in some capacity. Even if you don't experience or haven't experienced the things that Amory's experienced or that Alex has experienced, even if those things aren't your story, I know that they aren't my story, but there are things and there are elements and there are situations and feelings that a lot of us have experienced and that a lot of us can relate to. And so it really helps us to gain perspective. Perhaps it is a matter of, oh, yes, I feel seen by this. I feel seen by Amory. I feel seen by Alex. I feel like they understand me. These are characters that I can truly relate to because they're very real and they're very hurt. Or if it's one of those situations where you read it and it opens your eyes to, oh, well, okay, that makes sense, right? Perhaps it's that you're a guy and you're reading Amory's perspective and your eyes are opened to perhaps what it feels like to be a girl. Or even if you're a girl and you read Alex and you hear what Alex has to say to Amory and you think, I didn't really think about that from a guy's perspective. I didn't really think about that. And so this book is really all about perspective, and that might sound really serious, but it's very faint, and it's very, it just naturally becomes that. It naturally opens your mind to those perspectives. That is what Hughes is all about. Mystery solved, mystery unlocked, okay? So I, of course, do highly recommend you read Hughes. Hughes, I mean, like I said, it is just an absolute, it's my favorite ever, It's a beautiful story, and I do really, really think that you are going to enjoy it. So I will have it linked down below for you if you would like to read it. And stay tuned for more Hughes content. I'm really excited about some of the things that I am launching here and that I'm going to start doing here on my channel, just to sort of bring Hughes into conversation and to talk about Hughes, my favorite story, with you. So that is all I have for you today, and I will see you in my next video. So long.